At Vanessa's 26th birthday party in downtown Minneapolis, she pulls me aside to have an important conversation while our friends celebrate in the living room. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me, considering what I knew was about to unfold and how perfectly everything had aligned for this moment. I'd spent 3 weeks meticulously planning this party, coordinating with her sister Emma to get every single detail exactly right, the carefully curated guest list of local artists, theater colleagues, and creative types, the catered appetizers from that upscale Mediterranean place she constantly raved about, and even the custom playlist I'd spent hours creating that mixed her favorite indie folk artists with ambient electronic tracks I'd discovered through my work in sound engineering. We'd been together 3 years, and until very recently I genuinely believed we were building something meaningful and lasting together, the kind of partnership that could weather the inevitable ups and downs of adult life. I work as a sound engineer for the regional theater district, pulling in a decent steady income doing work I genuinely love, the kind of reliable, dependable guy who shows up early to help friends move apartments and remembers important anniversaries without needing phone reminders or calendar alerts. Vanessa and I first met through mutual friends at a crowded gallery opening in the Arts District, where I was immediately drawn to her passionate, animated discussions about color theory and her infectious excitement when describing her latest charcoal sketch series exploring urban solitude. She seemed to genuinely appreciate my quiet confidence and thoughtful approach to relationships, particularly the way I plan dates specifically around her interests and creative pursuits instead of defaulting to the generic dinner and movie routine that seemed to define most people's dating lives. Our relationship had gradually developed comfortable, reassuring rhythms over our 3 years together, lazy Sunday morning coffee sessions while reading through the arts and culture sections, weekend farmers market expeditions where she'd sketch interesting vendors and produce displays while I carefully selected ingredients for the elaborate weekend dinners I enjoyed cooking for us, and peaceful weekday evenings where she'd work on her art projects at the kitchen table while I mixed sound for upcoming theater productions in my home studio setup. But over the past 6 months, something fundamental and unsettling had shifted in the dynamic between us, though I couldn't quite pinpoint exactly when or how it started. Conversations gradually became stilted and superficial. Physical intimacy began feeling mechanical and obligatory rather than spontaneous and passionate, and she started mentioning her growing need for independence and creative space with increasing frequency, urgency, and what felt like barely concealed resentment. I could feel her systematically and deliberately withdrawing emotionally from our shared life and future plans, but I naively attributed these changes to mounting pressure from her unfulfilling marketing job and her ongoing, somewhat desperate search for clearer artistic direction and creative purpose in her life. I figured she was simply going through an extended quarter-life crisis and needed patient, understanding support from me while she worked through whatever internal conflicts were troubling her, completely failing to realize she was methodically detaching herself from our relationship while simultaneously keeping me as a comfortable, reliable safety net for her emotional and practical needs. Standing in her apartment's cramped kitchen while animated laughter and overlapping conversations drifted in from the birthday party in full swing, she carefully explained with measured, precisely chosen words that while she truly loved me deeply as a person and genuinely valued our shared history and experiences together, she'd come to the difficult realization that she simply wasn't romantically in love with me anymore and desperately needed significant space and time to figure out her authentic feelings about our relationship's future trajectory. Her entire prepared speech sounded unnaturally rehearsed and almost clinical in its delivery, like she'd practiced these exact phrases multiple times in front of her bathroom mirror to achieve just the right tone of gentle finality mixed with plausible emotional conflict. I couldn't help but notice she was still prominently wearing the delicate promise ring I'd given her 6 months earlier during our romantic weekend getaway to Duluth, the carefully chosen silver band with tiny sapphires that had cost me nearly a month's discretionary income. Watching it catch and reflect the harsh kitchen light as she gestured nervously with her hands throughout her breakup monologue. When I asked her directly and matter-of-factly whether she planned to return the ring, given the circumstances she was describing, she deflected uncomfortably by insisting we could figure out those kinds of practical details later and suggested we should just focus on enjoying the party for now since everyone had gone to such trouble to be here celebrating with her. The timing was actually absolutely perfect. I told her with complete sincerity and remarkable calm, gently taking her hand and confidently leading her back toward the crowded living room where I smoothly and deliberately introduced her to Sarah, the incredibly talented pottery studio owner I'd been secretly dating for the past 2 months after meeting her at a weekend ceramics workshop in the Arts District. The entire room fell into stunned, uncomfortable silence as Vanessa's face rapidly cycled through visible confusion, dawning realization, complete shock, and finally undisguised rage as she fully understood that I'd completely moved on and found someone new while she was still wearing my promise ring and carefully orchestrating what she'd assumed would be her controlled, dignified breakup narrative where she maintained complete emotional authority over the situation. I calmly revealed to the stunned party guests that Sarah and I had met 8 weeks earlier at a weekend ceramics workshop in the Arts District, where we'd immediately connected over our shared appreciation for craftsmanship, attention to detail, and the patience required to create something beautiful and lasting, and had been quietly building a genuine, meaningful connection while I patiently waited for Vanessa to finally end our clearly dying relationship. The workshop had been something I'd signed up for on a complete whim, wanting to try something creative and hands-on outside my usual technical sound engineering work, and Sarah had been the skilled instructor leading our small, intimate group through the fundamentals of wheel throwing, glazing techniques, and the meditative aspects of working with clay. She'd immediately noticed my careful attention to the technical aspects of the craft and my genuinely curious questions about the artistic process behind creating functional pottery, and we'd naturally started talking during breaks about the fascinating intersection of technical skill and creative expression that defined both our professional worlds. What had begun as friendly, stimulating conversations about pottery techniques and artistic philosophy had gradually evolved into extended coffee meetings after subsequent weekly workshops, then leisurely weekend walks through the sculpture garden discussing everything from career aspirations to childhood memories, and eventually the mutual realization that we shared not just creative interests but fundamental values about commitment, honesty, and the importance of building something lasting and authentic together. Sarah initially looked absolutely mortified to be thrust into this incredibly awkward and uncomfortable social situation, clearly having had no idea whatsoever about the promise ring situation or that Vanessa had been planning to break up with me tonight, but she handled the escalating tension with remarkable grace, composure, and dignity that impressed everyone watching. When she explained to the increasingly uncomfortable and bewildered party guests that she genuinely believed I was completely single and emotionally available when we first started dating 2 months ago, her sincerity and genuine confusion about the circumstances were obvious to everyone in the room. Vanessa immediately exploded in front of all our mutual friends, her carefully maintained composure and planned narrative completely crumbling as she accused me of emotional cheating, betrayal, and manipulation while simultaneously trying desperately to justify why she'd continued wearing my promise ring despite actively wanting to end our relationship for months. The cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy of her position was absolutely striking to everyone watching this unfold. She was genuinely furious that I'd moved on and found someone else while she was planning to leave me, angry and indignant that I'd developed feelings for someone new while she was deliberately keeping me as an emotional backup plan and safety net. Her voice became increasingly shrill, desperate, and unhinged as she tried frantically to explain to our bewildered, uncomfortable friends how I was somehow the villain in this scenario, despite the undeniable fact that she was literally in the process of breaking up with me when I introduced my new girlfriend to the room. The festive party atmosphere evaporated instantly as guests began exchanging deeply uncomfortable glances and quietly, awkwardly reaching for their coats and purses, clearly wanting to escape the toxic drama and emotional chaos that was unfolding in real time before their eyes. Emma, Vanessa's younger sister, made the deliberate choice to stay behind and witness the complete emotional meltdown that followed, watching in what appeared to be equal parts fascination and horror as Vanessa launched into an increasingly incoherent rant about how I'd completely ruined her carefully planned narrative and made her look like the selfish, manipulative villain in front of everyone who mattered to her social and professional life. The irony was absolutely perfect and poetic. She desperately wanted to be the one gracefully and maturely walking away from a relationship that no longer served her growth and happiness, positioned as the thoughtful adult making difficult but necessary decisions about her future direction and personal fulfillment. Instead, she was being revealed as someone who'd been emotionally stringing along a devoted, caring partner while keeping her romantic options strategically open, completely checked out of the relationship but unwilling to fully commit to ending things until she had total control over the timing, presentation, and narrative surrounding the breakup. Sarah and I quietly gathered our coats and headed calmly toward the apartment door while Vanessa continued her increasingly incoherent tirade about betrayal, manipulation, and emotional abuse, though it was becoming unclear to everyone listening who exactly she thought was manipulating whom in this bizarre situation. As we stepped into the hallway and prepared to leave this chaos behind, I turned back one final time to ask Vanessa politely but firmly to please return the promise ring, since it clearly no longer represented anything meaningful or valuable to either of us, and she reluctantly slipped it off her trembling finger and threw it at my feet with theatrical fury and dramatic flair. Vanessa immediately launched an intensive, calculated social media campaign portraying herself as the innocent victim of my supposed betrayal and systematic emotional manipulation, posting carefully crafted cryptic quotes about people who can't handle honest communication and emotional manipulation disguised as healthy relationships, along with vague but pointed inspirational messages about recognizing toxic patterns and finding the inner strength to walk away from situations that no longer serve your authentic self and personal growth journey. Her Instagram stories became a constant, relentless stream of passive-aggressive content clearly and obviously directed at me, featuring carefully selected quotes about men who lead secret double lives while pretending to be trustworthy partners, the critical importance of trusting your feminine intuition when someone shows you their true character through their actions rather than their words, and supposedly empowering messages about strong, independent women who refuse to accept anything less than complete honesty, transparency, and respect in their romantic relationships and personal lives. She systematically positioned herself as the mature, emotionally intelligent partner who'd tried desperately to have an adult conversation about legitimate relationship concerns and growing incompatibilities, only to discover through devastating circumstances that her trusted boyfriend had been secretly dating someone else for months while pretending to be fully committed to working through their problems together as a loving, supportive couple. The elaborate narrative she constructed and promoted painted me as a manipulative, fundamentally dishonest person who deliberately strung her along while exploring other romantic options behind her back, conveniently omitting the crucial fact that she'd been emotionally checked out and actively planning to break up with me while keeping me as her comfortable backup plan and emotional security blanket. Meanwhile, I made the conscious, deliberate choice to focus entirely on my demanding and genuinely fulfilling work as a sound engineer for the regional theater district and developing my authentically promising new relationship with Sarah, completely refusing to engage with Vanessa's increasingly elaborate online drama or waste any precious time and energy defending myself publicly against her fictional narrative and systematic character assassination attempts. I had multiple complex, challenging productions in various stages of development that required my complete professional attention and specialized technical expertise, from intimate black box theater pieces with intricate acoustic requirements and subtle sound design needs to large-scale musical productions requiring sophisticated multi-track mixing and live sound engineering coordination. And I found genuine peace and deep satisfaction in losing myself completely in the precision, artistry, and collaborative creativity required to create perfect acoustic environments for live theatrical performance. Sarah initially struggled with considerable guilt and self-doubt about the circumstances surrounding how our relationship had begun and developed, particularly the dramatic and publicly humiliating way it had been revealed at Vanessa's birthday party in front of all our mutual friends and colleagues, until she gradually came to understand and fully accept that Vanessa had been systematically and deliberately emotionally checked out of our relationship for many months while consciously keeping me as a comfortable backup plan and emotional safety net for her own security and convenience. Through our many long, honest, and vulnerable conversations about the complicated situation and its ongoing emotional aftermath, Sarah began to recognize the clear, unmistakable pattern of psychological manipulation and emotional control that had characterized the final 6 months of my relationship with Vanessa. And she came to realize that my moving on and finding someone new who genuinely valued and appreciated me was actually a healthy, appropriate response to being systematically emotionally abandoned while being kept in romantic limbo against my knowledge or informed consent. Our mutual friends initially found themselves caught in an uncomfortable, socially awkward position, feeling significant social pressure to choose sides in what superficially appeared to be a messy, complicated breakup situation with competing narratives about who was actually at fault and who deserved sympathy and support, but most of them eventually came to support my perspective and behavior once they learned the complete, accurate timeline of events and began to recognize Vanessa's well-established pattern of keeping people emotionally hooked and invested while she secretly explored other options and possibilities. The friends who had known both of us well for several years started privately sharing stories and detailed observations about previous instances where Vanessa had exhibited similar manipulative behavior patterns, maintaining relationships and friendships just long enough to serve her immediate emotional, social, or practical needs before smoothly transitioning away when something more appealing, exciting, or advantageous became available to her. I made the intentional decision to change my relationship status on all social media platforms and began posting genuine, joyful photos with Sarah that authentically showcased our shared interests in pottery creation and ceramic arts, live music performances and theater events, weekend hiking adventures in beautiful natural settings throughout Minnesota, and quiet evenings at home cooking elaborate, experimental meals together and simply enjoying each other's company without any drama or manipulation, while Vanessa's posts simultaneously became increasingly bitter, transparent, and desperate in their obvious attempts to generate sympathy and validation from our former mutual friend group about how she'd been supposedly wronged and betrayed by someone she'd completely trusted and believed in throughout their entire relationship together. Over the following months, I gradually learned from our mutual friends and former colleagues that Vanessa had executed this exact same manipulative pattern and emotional strategy in at least 2 previous serious relationships, systematically claiming she needed space and time to think about the future while keeping her devoted partners emotionally invested through carefully calculated mixed signals, meaningful gifts at strategic moments designed to maintain hope, and just enough intermittent affection and intimacy to maintain their commitment and prevent them from moving on while she secretly explored other romantic options behind their backs. The stories that emerged from people who had witnessed her previous relationships painted a clear, disturbing picture of someone who viewed romantic partnerships as strategic arrangements and emotional investments rather than genuine connections based on mutual love and respect. Someone who deliberately kept devoted partners on emotional hooks while she systematically evaluated whether better opportunities might present themselves, only committing to definitively ending things when she'd successfully secured what she perceived to be a superior alternative or when her current partner finally grew tired of the uncertainty and emotional manipulation. Her pattern involved creating just enough doubt and insecurity to keep partners fighting for her attention while never giving them the security of knowing where they stood, a psychological strategy that allowed her to maintain control and keep her options open while avoiding the emotional vulnerability of genuine commitment. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah continued to deepen and flourish in ways that felt completely natural, effortless, and authentic, as we bonded over our genuine shared interests in live music performances throughout the vibrant Twin Cities art scene, spending entire weekends cooking elaborate experimental meals together while discussing everything from career aspirations and professional dreams to childhood memories and family traditions, and gradually renovating the charming small house I'd purchased after finally moving out of the apartment I'd shared with Vanessa for the final 2 years of our relationship. Sarah had made the exciting decision to expand her successful pottery business and opened a second studio location in a trendy arts district neighborhood, and I found myself genuinely excited about supporting her entrepreneurial dreams and celebrating her professional successes in ways that felt meaningful, authentic, and truly supportive rather than obligatory or performative. Her business was thriving, with a growing client base of both beginners taking recreational classes and serious artists developing their craft, and watching her passion and skill flourish in this creative environment reminded me what it felt like to be with someone who was genuinely pursuing their dreams rather than just complaining about their circumstances. I also received a significant and well-deserved promotion to head sound engineer at the regional theater, a position that came with substantially increased creative responsibilities, much better financial compensation, and the exciting opportunity to work on more ambitious and artistically challenging productions throughout the greater Minneapolis area. Both Sarah and I were thriving professionally and personally, building something together that felt sustainable, genuine, and based on mutual respect, shared values, authentic compatibility, and a fundamental desire to support each other's growth rather than convenience, habit, fear of being alone, or the illusion of security. Meanwhile, I heard through our remaining mutual social connections that Vanessa was cycling rapidly through various dating apps and short-term relationships, posting constant updates on social media about finding herself and refusing to settle for anything less than she deserved while secretly monitoring both Sarah's business accounts and my personal social media through multiple fake profiles that her concerned friends eventually discovered and reported to me. According to people who still maintained contact with her, Vanessa brought up my name and criticized Sarah's relationship with me constantly in conversations, obsessively analyzing our partnership while simultaneously claiming she was so much happier now and had dodged a major bullet by ending things when she did, though her obvious preoccupation with my new life suggested the complete opposite of someone who had successfully moved on from a relationship. The stark contrast between her public claims of happiness and personal growth and her obvious, consuming preoccupation with my new life became a source of increasingly uncomfortable conversation among our former friend group, who began to recognize the manipulative pattern of behavior for what it really was and started gradually distancing themselves from her increasingly desperate and transparent attempts to maintain social relevance in situations where my name or Sarah's successful business might come up naturally in conversation. People who had initially felt sympathy for her situation began to see through the facade when they realized she was spending more time obsessing over my relationship than building her own life, and several mutual friends privately told me they felt manipulated by her constant attempts to fish for information about my personal life while pretending to be casually concerned about my well-being. What made her behavior particularly uncomfortable for our social circle was how she would bring up my name in completely unrelated conversations, finding ways to redirect discussions toward criticizing my character or questioning Sarah's motives, as if she couldn't accept that people might genuinely find happiness without her involvement or approval. Her inability to move forward gracefully was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone around her, and the friends who had initially tried to remain neutral were beginning to understand that her version of events had been carefully constructed to paint herself as the victim of circumstances she had actually orchestrated herself. 18 months after the devastating birthday party confrontation that had completely exposed the true manipulative nature of our relationship dynamic, I proposed to Sarah at the pottery studio where we'd first met, with a ring I'd designed myself that incorporated small, meaningful clay elements from her artwork, creating something that genuinely represented our shared journey and authentic connection rather than following traditional expectations or social pressures about what an engagement should look like. The proposal itself was intimate and personal, taking place in the studio after hours when Sarah was finishing a commission piece, surrounded by the pottery wheels and glazing stations where our relationship had first begun to develop naturally through shared creative interests and genuine compatibility. Sarah said yes immediately, her face lighting up with pure joy and excitement, and we celebrated that evening with the close friends who had watched our relationship flourish organically from the very beginning. People who understood and appreciated the genuine foundation we'd built together based on mutual respect, shared values, and authentic emotional connection. The engagement ring represented everything our relationship embodied: thoughtfulness, creativity, collaboration, and a deep understanding of what made each other truly happy, rather than expensive gestures designed to impress others or compensate for emotional deficiencies in the relationship itself. When news of our engagement inevitably reached Vanessa through our interconnected social media networks and mutual friends, she experienced what could only be described as a complete emotional and psychological breakdown, sending increasingly erratic and desperate text messages to members of my family whom she'd met only a handful of times during our 3-year relationship, claiming that I had somehow stolen her predetermined life plans and that Sarah had systematically manipulated me away from what she dramatically called my real soulmate and destined partner. Her messages to my parents and sister were so bizarre, desperate, and disconnected from reality that they forwarded them to me with genuine concern about her mental state and emotional stability, asking if they should be worried about potential escalation or whether this kind of behavior was normal for someone dealing with the end of a relationship. The content of her increasingly frantic messages revealed a deeply distorted perception of reality where she'd convinced herself that our relationship had been destined for marriage and that Sarah was some kind of calculating interloper who destroyed her predetermined future, completely ignoring the fundamental fact that she'd been the one who wanted to break up with me in the first place. Most disturbing and concerning was her apparent belief that wearing my promise ring while simultaneously planning to end our relationship had somehow established her permanent claim to my future happiness, as if the ring represented a binding contract rather than a symbol of mutual commitment that she'd actively and deliberately rejected. Vanessa then escalated her increasingly erratic behavior by showing up uninvited at my workplace during a particularly busy and stressful production week, demanding to speak with me privately and insisting that our 3-year relationship meant something significant and irreplaceable and that I was making a huge mistake by rushing into marriage with someone I'd only known for 20 months. Her unexpected appearance at the theater was particularly embarrassing and disruptive because she arrived during critical tech rehearsals for a major production, forcing me to excuse myself from essential work to deal with her emotional crisis in front of my professional colleagues and the cast members who were depending on my technical expertise. She claimed she needed to have an urgent conversation about our shared history and the mistake I was making by choosing someone who didn't really know me the way she did, suggesting that Sarah was somehow manipulating me into making decisions that went against my true nature and authentic desires. Security was eventually called to escort her from the building after she became increasingly erratic and refused to leave voluntarily when I politely but firmly explained that I had no interest in rehashing our relationship or discussing my engagement plans with her, and she began claiming that I was under some kind of spell and that she needed to save me from making the biggest mistake of my life. The incident was so concerning and disruptive that my supervisor suggested I might want to involve law enforcement if the harassment continued. And I realized that Vanessa's complete inability to accept the reality of our situation had crossed from merely annoying into potentially dangerous territory that could affect my professional reputation and personal safety. The irony of her desperate behavior wasn't lost on me. She was fighting harder to keep me after our relationship had ended than she ever had while we were actually together, suggesting that her feelings had much more to do with control, possessiveness, and wounded ego than genuine love or sincere regret about losing something precious and meaningful. Her behavior revealed the true nature of how she'd viewed our relationship all along, not as a partnership between equals, but as a situation she could control and manipulate according to her timeline and emotional needs, and my engagement to Sarah represented the final, undeniable proof that I'd moved completely beyond her sphere of influence. The fact that she couldn't accept my happiness with someone else demonstrated that her feelings for me had always been more about ownership than love, more about having me available as a backup option than genuinely wanting to build a life together. What made the situation even more unsettling was how her narrative had shifted from claiming she needed space and wasn't in love with me anymore to insisting that we were meant to be together and that I was betraying our destined connection by choosing Sarah instead. This complete reversal of her stated feelings suggested that her original breakup speech had been entirely strategic, designed to keep me emotionally invested while she explored other options, and that she'd never actually intended to let me go permanently. Her inability to maintain consistent feelings or motivations from one conversation to the next revealed someone who was fundamentally dishonest with herself and others about what she actually wanted from relationships. The most telling aspect of her escalating behavior was how it contrasted so sharply with Sarah's response to our engagement, which had been pure joy, excitement, and gratitude for the genuine partnership we'd built together through honest communication and mutual respect rather than manipulation and emotional games. As Sarah and I began planning our wedding for the following fall, focusing on creating a celebration that reflected our shared values and genuine partnership, Vanessa's behavior became increasingly concerning and intrusive, escalating from annoying social media stalking to more direct and potentially dangerous forms of harassment that forced us to consider our personal safety and security seriously. She began systematically frequenting all the places where Sarah and I used to spend time together during my relationship with her: coffee shops, restaurants, hiking trails, even the farmer's market where we'd had some of our most peaceful weekend mornings, apparently hoping to run into us or simply to insert herself into spaces that held significance in our shared history. Her presence at these locations wasn't coincidental or accidental. Mutual friends reported seeing her sitting alone for hours at our favorite coffee shop, obviously waiting and watching for us to appear, creating an atmosphere of surveillance that made both Sarah and me genuinely uncomfortable about maintaining our normal routines and visiting places we'd previously enjoyed. Even more disturbing was her systematic approach to befriending several of Sarah's pottery students and regular clients at both studio locations, initially presenting herself as someone casually interested in ceramics but gradually revealing her true purpose of gathering information about our relationship, our daily schedules, our future plans, and any personal details she could extract from people who trusted Sarah professionally. Sarah's students eventually came forward to report these uncomfortable conversations, describing how this strange woman would ask increasingly personal questions about Sarah's boyfriend and their relationship timeline, often making comments that seemed designed to plant seeds of doubt about my character or the authenticity of our connection. The pottery studio, which had been Sarah's creative sanctuary and professional home, began to feel invaded and unsafe, forcing her to have awkward conversations with her students about maintaining appropriate boundaries and not sharing personal information about her private life with people they didn't know well. Meanwhile, Vanessa's social media presence became even more elaborate and transparent in its obsessive focus on our relationship, featuring lengthy posts about people who build relationships on lies and deception, pointed comments about certain women who manipulate men away from their true soulmates, and increasingly dramatic inspirational quotes about karma eventually catching up with those who destroy other people's happiness through calculated manipulation and emotional warfare. Her posts had evolved from subtle passive aggression into obvious public attacks on both Sarah's character and the legitimacy of our relationship, suggesting that I was being controlled or manipulated by someone who didn't understand my true nature the way she did after 3 years together. The most unsettling development was her decision to start dating someone who bore such a striking physical resemblance to me that mutual friends were genuinely confused when they saw photos on her social media, wondering if she was somehow trying to replace me with a version she could control more effectively. Her new boyfriend had the same height, build, hair color, and even similar clothing style preferences, and she posted obvious comparison photos with captions about finally finding someone authentic and genuine, someone who understood what real commitment looked like, making not-so-subtle implications about how this new relationship represented everything her relationship with me had failed to be. The relationship imploded within 3 months when she made the critical error of calling her new boyfriend by my name during what witnesses described as an increasingly heated argument about his failure to meet her expectations and demands for constant attention and validation. The final straw in this escalating pattern of harassment came when Vanessa attempted to book the same wedding venue that Sarah and I had chosen for our fall ceremony, claiming to the venue coordinator that she'd seen and discussed this location first years ago during conversations about hypothetical future weddings, and that my using this venue represented some kind of theft of her original ideas and dreams about her perfect wedding day. The venue coordinator, confused by this bizarre claim, called me directly to clarify the situation, explaining that a woman claiming to be my former fiancé was insisting she had prior claim to our book date and location. When I explained the actual circumstances of our relationship and breakup, the coordinator was so concerned about the situation that they offered to involve their security team if necessary and suggested we might want to consider changing our wedding date or location to avoid any potential disruptions on what should be our special day. The level of delusion required for Vanessa to believe she could claim ownership over a venue we'd toured together once, years ago, during a casual conversation about what we might want in a hypothetical future wedding, demonstrated just how disconnected from reality her thinking had become in her desperation to maintain some control over my life and choices. Sarah handled this latest escalation with remarkable grace and perspective, suggesting that we hire professional security for our wedding day and focus on building our life together rather than being derailed by someone else's inability to move forward with their own life. Her mature response to what could have been a relationship-threatening source of stress reminded me once again why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Her ability to see situations clearly, respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, and prioritize what actually mattered rather than getting caught up in drama and manipulation. I realized through watching Sarah's calm, measured response to Vanessa's escalating harassment that I was seeing the stark contrast between someone who was emotionally mature and secure in themselves versus someone who was fundamentally insecure and willing to destroy other people's happiness rather than build their own. The situation also helped me understand that Vanessa's inability to let go of our relationship wasn't really about losing me specifically, but rather about her compulsive need to control the narrative and outcome of every situation in her life, and her complete inability to accept that other people might make choices that didn't revolve around her needs and timeline. Her behavior had escalated from annoying to concerning to genuinely frightening, and I began to understand that her obsession with preventing my happiness with Sarah was rooted in something much deeper and more troubling than simple heartbreak or regret about ending our relationship. The pattern of behavior she was exhibiting, the stalking, the harassment, the attempts to interfere with our venue booking, the systematic invasion of Sarah's professional space, suggested someone who couldn't accept the basic reality that other people had the right to make their own choices and live their own lives without her involvement or approval. Sarah and I had our wedding on a perfect October afternoon at the restored historic mansion we'd chosen, surrounded by close family and friends who had genuinely supported our relationship from the very beginning, creating exactly the kind of intimate, meaningful celebration we'd always envisioned together without any dramatic incidents or unwanted appearances. The ceremony was a beautiful reflection of our genuine partnership, featuring personal vows we'd written ourselves that spoke to our shared values, creative collaboration, and commitment to supporting each other's dreams and growth rather than trying to change or control one another for our own needs or insecurities. 2 years later, we welcomed our first child, a healthy daughter who immediately became the center of our world, bringing us even closer together as we navigated the joys and challenges of parenthood as a united team, and purchased a larger home with enough space for Sarah to expand her successful pottery business into a dedicated studio and for me to build the professional home recording studio I'd always dreamed of having since my early days in sound engineering. Our social media presence showed authentic family moments that reflected our actual daily life rather than carefully curated content designed to generate envy or project false perfection. Sarah teaching pottery classes with our baby sleeping peacefully nearby in her carrier, me recording gentle lullabies and ambient soundscapes for our daughter's bedtime routine, and quiet evenings spent working on our respective creative projects while our child played contentedly between us on the living room floor. The contrast between our genuine happiness and the carefully curated facade that Vanessa had always maintained on social media became even more apparent as we settled into the comfortable rhythms of family life, where real joy came from small, ordinary moments rather than dramatic gestures designed to impress others or generate envy from people we barely knew. Exactly 3 years after the birthday party incident that had completely changed the trajectory of all our lives in ways none of us could have predicted, Vanessa sent me a lengthy, carefully worded email claiming she was finally ready to apologize sincerely and take full responsibility for her past behavior, asking if we could meet somewhere neutral for closure so she could move forward in what she called a healthy and mature way. I read her message while sitting in Sarah's pottery studio on a peaceful Saturday morning, watching her put the finishing touches on a commissioned piece for a local restaurant while our daughter napped contentedly in her stroller nearby, surrounded by the life we'd built together through genuine love, mutual respect, and honest communication rather than manipulation and emotional games. Sarah and I exchanged a knowing look when I showed her the message on my phone, both of us immediately recognizing this as yet another attempt by Vanessa to insert herself back into our lives and create unnecessary drama where none existed, rather than any genuine desire for closure, personal growth, or authentic healing from her past mistakes. Without hesitation or second thoughts, I blocked Vanessa's email address permanently and deleted the message completely, finally understanding with perfect clarity that her revelation at her birthday party 3 years earlier had been the greatest gift she could have ever given me, because it had freed me to find someone who actually wanted to build a meaningful, lasting life together rather than just control the narrative of our relationship for her own emotional needs and validation.